Hey, Robert Phoenix here. What's going on, everybody? I'm a little bit late today. I had an early morning reading. Let me get the owl. I got to get my owl just right there on my right shoulder. Right there. There it is. Get my totem. One more. There it is. Perfect. I like it. There it is. I like that. Good angle. Hey, so I apologize. I was a little bit late today. Actually, I'm a lot late, 38 minutes. I actually had a reading with somebody in China. Very cool. Very, very cool experience. Sometimes I just absolutely love my gig, um, even though I have to get up early in the morning and uh, get on Skype and do a China thing. Hey, what's going on, Miss Judy? It is it's a good work, I have to say, and thank you for hanging in there and being patient. We always get to where we're going to be with the show at some point, and usually it's 9 o'clock Central Standard Time here in Flyover. So, welcome to 15 Minutes of Flame. Today, we're going to get into some very interesting material. I'm going to go into the most immediate material and the latest news, and that is the downing of a Russian jet. And I'm going to try to get to the latest piece of information. So, let's see what we have here. This is from the uh, Twitter account of Partisan Girl, who's a Syrian. And here comes Jasper. He's getting in on the show. Unlike Nathan's Doshi, who really does nothing except provide spiritual guidance for Nathan, Jasper, he gets right in and becomes part of the broadcast. Isn't that right, Jasper? Yeah. Okay. So here we go. So this is from the War Zone. It's August 25th. And it's a story about Syria and Russia linking their air defense networks. So that was on the record as of the 25th of August. And Russia made a statement. It says it is formally linked its air defenses in Syria together with those of the regime of Bashar al-Assad. This could potentially limit the U.S. military's ability to support its local partners fighting ISIS. Right. Increases the risk of dangerous confrontation and just adds yet another layer to an ever more complicated situation on the ground. Okay, so that was announced back in August that those systems were put online and integrated together. But there has been more action that's taken place since then. And this is what's happening right now. Let me get in on this one. So this is all breaking news. We got. I'm sorry. The feline energy today is like off the charts. Jasper and Rosie are now combining to be part of this. So this was from today. Let's see, the 17th at 5:32 p.m. So this was last night. And here's what we have. It says Israel has downed a Russian 1120 military aircraft with 14 servicemen on board over the Mediterranean Sea. The Israeli Air Force attacked targets in Latakia, Syria at the same time. So now there is an alert here, and it says that it looks like a false flag operation. It says US CNN claims Syria down the Russian spy plane. So we're getting two pieces of information here. That it was Syria that downed the plane, and that Israel was the actual culprit. So here we go. This is from Zero Hedge. I'm just going to go up on this. So this is from today and 8:30 this morning. This would be East Coast time, so that would have been about 2 hours ago. The headline from Zero Hedge is Moscow accuses Israel of using downed Russian jet as cover during Syrian attack. As more information about the downing overnight of a Russian reconnaissance plane by aging Syrian anti aircraft weapons becomes available, the Russian defense military has issued a shocking claim that will undoubtedly ratchet up tensions between Russia and Israel. While Russia had previously blamed Israel for the downing of the plane, which resulted in the deaths of 15 Russian servicemen, the MOD is now saying that Israel intended to use the Russian plane as cover during the attack. According to the Russian military, the plane was shot down while responding to an attack by 4 Israeli F 16s on Syrian government positions in the coastal town of Latakia. The attack was the latest of some 200 attacks launched by the Israelis over the past 18 months, with the stated aim of preventing Iran from expanding its foothold in war torn Syria. Israeli jets flew over the Mediterranean to launch the attack, not only giving Russia a minute's notice via a shared hotline before commencing the strike. This allowed the Russian military no time to pull its planes and personnel from the line of fire. Wow. Okay. So now a spokesman for the Russian Ministry of Defense is saying that Russia believes the attack was a setup, with Israel hoping to use the Russian plane as badly needed cover from Syrian air defenses, since the Russian plane had much higher profile than the Israeli plane. The Syrian defense systems would naturally latch on to the 220 or the 1120. So here's what happened. This is what happened. The Russian plane was at a certain altitude, and there were Syrian planes underneath it, buzzing it. I'm sorry, Israeli planes underneath it, buzzing it. And then the Syrian defense systems locked onto the higher target and went after the higher target. It's pretty crafty. The Israeli pilots used the Russian plane as cover and set it up to be targeted by the Syrian air defense forces. As a consequence, the 1120, which has radar cross section much larger than the F 16, was shot down by an S 200 system missile. Wow. It's fucking. Man, that's crafty. That's some crafty warfare. Let's read on here. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu discussed the incident with his Israeli counterpart, Avdor Lieberman. On Tuesday, he conveyed Moscow's anger about the incident and its blaming of the Israeli military for purportedly setting up the Russian plane to be shot down by aging Syrian air defenses. Russia said a French Navy frigate, the Auvergne, was in the area of the attack, along with the downed Russian 1120 plane during the Israeli operation. In a statement, the Russian military accused Israel of not leaving Russian forces enough time to respond to their warning about the attack. A search and rescue operation is underway, but so far only body parts have been recovered. The Russian ministry said the Israelis must have known that the Russian plane was present in the area, but this did not stop them from executing the provocation. Israel also failed to warn Russia about the planned operation in advance. The warning came just a minute before the attack started, which did not have time to move the Russian plane to a safe area, the statement said. A later update said debris from the downed plane was found some 27 kilometers off the Latakia coast. The search party collected some body parts, personnel possessions of the crew, and fragments of the plane. Israel did not comment on the reports about the air raid in Syria, which is consistent with its usual policy on such matters. Israeli officials earlier acknowledged hundreds of airstrikes conducted in Syria over the past years. Israel claims its interventions are necessary to fight the Iranian presence in its neighboring country. Israel's embassy in Moscow has refused to comment on Russian military statement on the 1120 crash. The Russian 1120 was accidentally shot down by the aging Syrian S-200 anti-aircraft missile system during the chaos as Russia scrambled planes to respond to the attack. Russian radar also registered missile launches from the French frigate, but it's unclear how this factored into the attack, if at all. So the French were firing on the Russian plane. People, we're a few dance steps from international war here. I'm going to read a few comments. I always love the zero hedge comments because they're salty. This guy says, accident my ass. Israel intentionally failed to notify the Russians of the attack to ensure pro-Assad aircraft would be in the area. My Putin should respond in kind if he is to continue to have the support of the military. So now you have another person who has a different idea. And this is Brendan O'Connell, whom I've referenced before on this broadcast. And that Brendan O'Connell has information and bits and pieces of evidence that everybody's colluding, that there's collusion between the Russians and the Israelis, the Russians and the Iranians, maybe not so much for the Syrians. And the Americans are in that mix. So there's a Twitter feed. I'm going to get into, I think it's from Brendan O'Connell. So I'm going to give you the sort of the back, and this is what I was going to bring into the mix. It's the backstory here. So he has, let's see, the Iran-Israel war clown dance continues. I'd like a new scriptwriter. Surely alien invasion is long overdue. And that was from when? That was from May 12th. That was a while ago. So what Brandon O'Connell is talking about here is that there is a theater going on between these two countries. And let's see. He says Putin and Bibi are best buddies. Of course they are. Haven't you seen photos of them? This guy says O'Connell's been incarcerated for 3 years for his research into this. Operation Talpiot. It's the greatest threat to free men and women that has ever existed. He, Ryan Dawson, James Perloff, Christopher Bolin, Sybil Edmonds, Cynthia McKinney, and others have been shouting about Israel, and they all need serious support and assistance in getting the word out to the enslaved Goyim. Let's see. He should have sunk the French ship just because. Maybe even that Canadian ship in the Med as well. But no, he's a traitor and a pussy. Hang on. Someone is pounding on my door. Start shooting back. Let's see. There's a lot of stuff about KAL 700, 007. That was a plane that got shot down over North Korea back in 1983. What else do we have here? Here's an interesting question. Why doesn't Russia install the S-400 system in Syria? Tell Israel that they have and warn them that any subsequent Israeli losses won't be Russia's responsibility. This comment says this makes Russia look very weak and confuses what they are doing in Syria. They are supposedly their invitation from the Syrians to help defend itself against terrorists. If Russia steps out of the way whenever someone literally phones in an attack, what are they actually doing there? Does ISIS have warplanes? Why is Russia giving Syria X-200 systems if they refuse to defend Syrian airspace? It's one thing to not get baited into World War III, but the list of contradictions is getting long. This is true. Russia's long-term interests are on Syria remaining intact and stable. I find it hard to believe that they are just war profiteering like Turkey. Why would you find it hard to believe? So if they aren't there to turn some military-industrial complex dollars, then they need to shoot down some fucking Israeli war criminals. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen. I think when we look at an event like this, there are two things that we have to sort of take into account and consideration. Number one, we have to take into account, is the broadcast or is it real? Is what happened real? Did it actually take place? Were there people that were actually on that plane? Was the plane perhaps being remotely controlled instead of manually piloted? And is the whole thing a complete and utter smokescreen? I don't know. I don't know. I don't think we can look at news and events of the day from our sort of typical topical um, in the moment manner. It doesn't work because we don't have enough information, and we certainly don't have enough information into the complex context of the relationships that are being worked on, worked out, and shared by these groups who tend to have kind of this greater goal in mind by working together and establishing hegemony, even though it appears to be that they are working at cross purposes and are not allies, but are actually in conflict with one another. So I believe it's much more difficult um, to ascribe a certain amount of meaning on a particular event. On the surface, something's happened. On the surface, it looks like we are getting closer and closer to World War III. These all make sense from looking at it simply from that perspective. But is that what really happened? And and what's the deeper meaning? I think we have to look at events from this perspective now. We can't jump feet first and just say, "Hey, look, we're two breaths away from World War III." We don't completely know. Every now and then something can come into play, and there's chaos, and there's double cross, and there's double play. So maybe in this instance, this would have been a double cross move on Israel's part in order to create a level of deception. Maybe that's what happened. And maybe there's some internecine warfare that goes on behind the scenes. I was talking with Darren Williams, whom I've had on my show on a number of occasions. And Darren's a very interesting guy. He's really smart. He's kind of a gadfly. And the question he was asking, and this is what Eddie Bravo, who is a fairly consistent guest on Joe Rogan show, or has been. He's not there anymore, at least as much, because Eddie has theories that don't really correspond with Joe's new theories of how the world works. So Darren was pointing out that what Eddie pointed out is that these conflicts in the world are nothing more than kabuki theater, and that these people who are supposed enemies aren't really our enemies at all, and that they play a certain role so that the world has this idea that we're at conflict and at war with one another. And really all it is it's just high theater. And I think that there's some truth to that, because my feeling about governments and about groups inside of governments, and it has been for a very long time, is that they're gangs. They are gangs. They're not much different than the La Cosa Nostra, or the Triad. They are gangs, and they are gangs with diplomas. They're gangs with suits and ties. They are gangs that have initials after their names. People that populate the gangs: PhD, MBA, JS, right? So there. This is where it's at. And if you understand and look at the nature of gangs work together, and they have at times shared purpose and intent, and at times conflict. The conflict with gangs is usually based on land and resources. It's real typical. Let's say, for instance, your two gangs in inner city Los Angeles, and there is a territory that you're fighting over, and that territory is a territory where there happens to be, let's say, in a 2-mile radius, there happens to be 25 liquor stores and convenience stores. And those liquor stores and convenience stores happen to be distribution points for drugs because that's where you get a lot of foot traffic. And it can be, it's not like you're just out on a street corner and you're hustling and you get targeted for hustling. If you're mixing amongst the masses, it's much easier to do deals, right? So both of those gangs have their own kind of agenda. They're kind of working together because maybe they share intel, whatever they do. But then they've got this area that they've got to secure. And one gang will want to have dominance over that so they can make more money than the other gang. This is what happens. So when there are conflicts with gangs, they tend to be territorial and economic. And those same kinds of conflicts can bubble up and rise to the surface of what we would call governments, democracies, corporations, which are they're the legal contingency of gangs, is what they are. That's what they are. So this is how governments operate. They're gangs. And countries are gangs. And sometimes they work together, sometimes they work across purposes. But most of the time, what they all want to do is they all want to carry and convey the notion of threat, that they could be dangerous at any point in time. And that way it keeps the people of the neighborhood, keeps them on their toes. So we're talking about gang warfare is what we're talking about here. So was this a staged event in some ways? Was it due to the fact that Russia knew that the S-200 systems are faulty? Did Russia send up a plane that didn't have anybody in it? If that's the case, why? If that's not the case, and they really did have people in it, and Israel did maneuver the way that they did in order to get these aging and faulty missile systems to fire on the Russian plane, was that part of the plan? And if so, why? So I'm just bringing this up. It's in the news. You're going to hear about it. And I guess what I would say is try to back off of the World War III pedal, right? Get your foot off the gas on that, because again, we don't always know what's going on. And we'd like to be able to disassemble things and have our symbolic representations, which I do to the best of my ability. But we're also in a point in time where things aren't always what they seem. Now, if I'm not mistaken, what is today? Isn't today one of the Jewish holidays? Let's just see here. I think it is. It's Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur. So apparently on Yom Kippur, we just do this. So this is the day of atonement, where sin is addressed. And there is a doctrine called the Kol Nidre, which is the forgiveness of sins that have been perpetrated against people, communities, businesses, whatever. Okay. So the Kol Nidre is an Aramaic declaration recited in the synagogue before the beginning of the evening service in every Yom Kippur. Speaking strictly, it is not a prayer, although commonly spoken as if it were. Okay, so we have this attack which is taking place on Yom Kippur, and we have the Kol Nidre taking place. Now, part of the function of the Kol Nidre is to be forgiven for the sins of the past year. Also, the Kol Nidre is to be forgiven for the sins in the year to come. Because invariably we are human and we will sin. We will do things that are against God and against the nature of God. So it's interesting that this event is taking place on the advent of on the advent of the Yom Kippur and Kol Nidre. And if indeed the Israelis did do what they did from a religious perspective, at this time, they could be forgiven for it by their version of Yahweh, their God, right? Their manifestation of it. So interesting timing. Just sharing with you some of the component parts of it. Okay, that's the high ticket item for today in terms of what's going on with the news. I wanted to get into just a couple of other things. The ongoing feud and battle with Asia Argento and Rose McGowan is starting to reach just like epic proportions. Epic, epic, epic. Isn't it interesting as those two get into the cat fight of all cat fights and completely and utterly dismantle sort of the legitimacy of hashtag Me Too? What happens? We get less Moonvis. We get the less Moonvis crucifixion. So now all of a sudden we're focusing on Les Moonves. We're focusing on another powerful man taken down. These are powerful men. You know, Harvey Weinstein was no shrinking violet. This guy was a badass motherfucker when it came to films, when it came to distribution. Again, I'm going to invoke the image of a gang. You know, Miramax, which was the parent company, run by he and his brother, were often like gang-like in a lot of ways. I mean, it's like you don't get movies made. You don't get an entertainment or media empire by being nice. You cannot be a nice guy. You cannot have these principles of fairness and equity. I mean, that's a scam. It's a total scam. The models of success based on this world are often models that have a high degree of compromise associated with them. So Harvey Weinstein was like a gang leader. I mean, just it looks like it, right? And this was like a gangland hit. You know, Asia Argento was deployed, gangland hit. These women who was it? Who was it? What's her name? Is it Ryan? The woman who came after Les Moonves. And there's more than one, by the way. So that's happening in the shadow of Asia Argento and Rose McGowan going after each other. Now, remember, they used to be best of buddies. Oh, my God. You know, Rose McGowan wrote a very touching, very, very touching tweet to the world. Oh, please do not judge her. Please be gentle on her. You don't know the full story. On and on and on and on and on. Meanwhile, she's getting her little, whatever Rain Dove is, boyfriend. It's not her boyfriend. It's her Z friend. Anyway, they hooked up, right? And they began a series of texts going back and forth with Asia, and Asia thinking that Rose McGowan is her partner in crime, the sister of Me Too, that she could share sensitive and private information. First of all, it's maybe sensitive to her because her legal standing with this, but it's certainly not private, not in the least, because we just know that everything's being snatched and grabbed. All right. So what they were doing, though, is they were setting her up. They were setting her up so that they could then take those tweets and sell them. This is not motivated by some greater sense of justice for the hashtag movement. No, they sold those tweets, made money off of them. But now they're claiming, they're taking the stance of being pious. Oh, admit it, Asia. It'll be good for you. It'll be good for you. It'll be good for the movement. Admit it. Please admit it. And they're fucking hypocrites. They're hypocrites. So that's going on now. Asia Argento is vowing to sue Rose McGowan. This is a big, big, big uh, change in the weather for those two. So I don't think that it's a coincidence that as two of the main people who were they weren't the founders, but they jumped on this thing and they popularized it. It was the 1-2 punch to Weinstein, the left, McGowan, the right with Argento. And they were the ones that really got it on the map and on the radar. And now the progenitors of that movement look as if they're shaky at best. Les Moonves is taken down. They tried to take down Trump with Stormy Daniels. That was a hashtag Me Too moment. And they're trying to do it again with Brett Kavanaugh, which leads me to my next piece, which happens to do with one Dianne Feinstein. I'm thinking of Barbara Boxer. Oh, by the way, here's an interesting story. I want to get to the Feinstein piece. This is from UPI. New Mexico sues Google, Twitter for illegally collecting data on children. That's interesting. New Mexico's in the news a lot lately, isn't it? Yeah, the compound that was shut down. Maybe that's why they're suing Google and Twitter, because Google and Twitter had information on those kids in the compound and sent it off to the various alphabet agencies. And of course, the observatory was shut down. I'm just going to read you the quick headline because I really want to get to the Feinstein stuff. New Mexico filed a lawsuit against Google, Twitter, and several app developers for illegally collecting data from children under the age of 13 without parental consent. New Mexico Attorney General Balderas said the companies are violating the 1998 Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, a federal law, by collecting and selling data on children. The lawsuit filed Wednesday comes after the University of California, Berkeley study analyzed nearly 6,000 children's apps and found that the majority of them appeared to violate COPPA. These apps can track where children live, play, and go to school with incredible precision. Okay, I would say that there will be other states that will follow suit. This is an interesting development, by the way. Sorry, this screen here a little bit. Keep your eyes on this. Keep your eyes. If the states go after these tech giants based on this study that came out of UC Berkeley, fascinating stuff. Okay, let's get to the Dianne Feinstein, the Kavanaugh accuser, to testify on sexual assault allegation. This woman is going to come in and do an Anita Hill. She better have her life. She better be prepared, especially around the stuff that's connected to Kavanaugh's mother, who was a sitting judge in Maryland, who presided over a foreclosure trial with Blassie's parents, her father specifically. This should be good theater. Get ready. You may want to get on whatchamacallit, that the Congress channel. I always forget the name of it. It's actually a pretty interesting channel. I want to get into the Feinstein stuff. And I'm going to put a link here on the page on the channel. This is probably one of the most significant compilations of corruption with Dianne Feinstein that I've seen in one place on the internet. It's her name. Okay, this is a fantastic piece, and it goes all the way up through Tesla. By the way, that's how current this is. So there's some bullet points that I just want to talk about, and there's significant bullet points, and then there are a lot more pieces here where Feinstein has been shown to be just incredibly corrupt. And it has to do with Solyndra and Tesla and the land that surrounds that area, which is, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Santa Clara County. Let's get into this. So here are the bullet points. In bullet point, the charges against the Feinstein family cartel in the clean tech crash corruption case include Feinstein was the promoter, lobbyist, and beneficiary of the side by side on the same plot of land, Tesla and Solyndra government handout funding scandal. Okay, so if you recall, Solyndra was a company that the government got in business with, and they were creating these tubes. They were these glass tubes that were used in solar panels to be able to hold the charge of these solar panels. And Solyndra was going to be the default company that was going to produce these glass tubes. And the government had actually given Solyndra a significant amount of money in order to run this company. And that was during the Obama administration. Now, the person who was the bag person and the lobbyist for that was Dianne Feinstein. Solyndra was doomed to fail. Why? Well, number one, Solyndra didn't understand the market. The Chinese made these glass tubes cheaper. Even though they were made in China, they were cheaper than what Solyndra was pumping out. Solyndra also couldn't meet the same number or demand. And this is why the Chinese are so successful. Solyndra could maybe create, let's say, 1,000 glass tubes a day. China is creating 100,000 glass tubes a day. And as they create the volume, they can charge less money. Doesn't matter whether the product is better or not. In this age of planned obsolescence, it's cheaper in some ways. Like if you could buy a light bulb that would last a lifetime, which apparently they can do this, and you would pay, let's say, $50 for that light bulb, or you could pay $1.50 for every light bulb that would be replacing that light bulb for, say, the next 10 years. What would you buy? Some say, oh, why take the $50 light bulb? Probably not. Probably take the $1.50 light bulb because you know that at some point in time it's going to go out, you're going to replace it, it's going to be cheap. But let's say you did it to every single light bulb in your house, you're spending $500 on light bulbs. You may keep them for a long time, but it's probably not the best spend. This is the difference between, in some ways, Solyndra and China. Even though we're not talking about quality, we're talking about quantity. So Solyndra was doomed to fail. It was doomed, and if you're a lender, which the United States government wanted us at the time, and by the way, this was happening at the beginning of Pluto and Capricorn, which is the rise of governance, right? It was the rise of the corporocratic state, where Pluto and Capricorn, the government and the state, began to meld together. And there are many examples of this right after Obama gets elected. And all these things were already in the works before he even got there. You remember how the United States owned General Motors for a brief period of time? Bailed them out, owned them. The United States bailed out AIG, which I don't even think is in business anymore. Not to mention the bailouts of Bear Stearns, which is no longer around. This is when the United States got involved in the buying of businesses because the businesses took an enormous hit based on all the garbage loans that were being essentially gambled on, and which led to the economic implosion of 2008. So Solyndra was in that pocket. And if the government had any kind of decent financial analysis, or somebody from the Solyndra side had a decent financial analysis, they'd be sitting there going like this and saying, the Chinese are going to crush us. because they're making their tubes for 65% less than we're making our tubes. How can we compete with? Oh, don't worry about it. What we'll get is we'll get government contracts. We'll get government contracts so that we will have our market already sort of etched out, and we won't compete with the Chinese in an open marketplace. That didn't happen. There wasn't the demand on the government side in order to, like, they could have bought those tubes and could have just stuck them somewhere. It could have been part of some bullshit program, which happens all the time, in order to hide money. But they didn't do it. And so they were acting as if they were a legitimate company, and they lost their ass. So one has to wonder if that was just a limited hang. And what happens after Solyndra? Tesla comes in. And who is funding Tesla? The United States government. Okay. So here we go. Feinstein's daughter, Catherine, documented illicit actions by her mother while in social habitation with the applicants. Her daughter, like, documented crime activity. Here's another bullet point. While in the mayor's office, Bruce Brugman, publisher of the top San Francisco weekly newspaper, the Bay Guardian, documented and published nearly 100 corruption charges against Feinstein. Local law enforcement efforts against Feinstein were nearly impossible at the time, according to Bay Guardian staff, because local politicians and authorities had been paid off by James Bronkema, David Rockefeller's bagman, and John Molinari, the local mob bagman. You see how those two interstitial points come together? This is exactly what I'm talking about. So we have this gang mob mentality that exists on the local level and goes all the way up to the highest corridors of power. And to think that governments or democracies or otherwise, or anything else relating to some form of equitable and fair representation of the people and the resources that are connected to the people and the land is utter bullshit. Disabuse yourself of that notion. Ex-Guardian staff have suggested that associates of one of those two Feinstein financing clans had possibly arranged the George Moscone assassination in order to position Feinstein for higher office. Possibly. Does that mean that Dan White was a Manchurian candidate? Interesting. Herb Newman of Sausalito, Feinstein's relative, was awarded the staffing contracts for Tesla and Solyndra based on Feinstein's say-so. Now, this is a direct conflict of interest. So a relative of Feinstein basically was the guy that was hired by Solyndra and Tesla to staff those companies. Feinstein and her chief of staff warned applicants about attempting to use the NUMMI auto factory. NUMMI was this car that was being created. So this area is it's the old GM plant, which is in, I think it's in Mountain View. Is it Mountain View? Mountain View or Sunnyvale? I think it's Sunnyvale. I think that's where it is. Hayward. I believe it's Hayward, if I'm not mistaken. So the GM plant became the NUMMI plant. The NUMMI plant became the Solyndra plant, and Solyndra is now Tesla. That gives you sort of the chain of ownership of that building. And when the GM plant was there, we used to drive by it a lot. There was a GM plant there, and then there was a Ford plant in Alviso, and they were actually making cars in these plants, and they were union jobs in these plants, right? And so every time they've gone so NUMMI, oh yeah, you could still work for a car manufacturer, translatable skills, but guess what? It's not going to be a union job, so you won't make as much. Oh, okay, NUMMI's out of business. Well, we're going to be doing solar tubes here. It's a wholly different beast. Why don't you go take a hike? Oh, Solyndra's out of business. Sorry, we're bringing cars back now. The NUMMI building as unusable, okay, meaning that who knows? There could be violations of health and safety standards in the building, environmental standards. In the press, yet Feinstein talked Tesla into using it so that her husband's company could profit from it and she could arrange kickbacks to Tesla more easily. Do you see how the game works? Feinstein worked with Senator Harry Reid on the clean tech scams. Together, by helping White House staff and financiers manipulate the program, they made over $50 million in personal profits at taxpayer expense. That's their job. That's what they're there to do. They're there to siphon off the public trough. Feinstein's staff worked for and were compensated by Tesla and Solyndra. In some cases, Feinstein's staff and Tesla were interchangeable in direct conflict of interest. Feinstein's husband had financial interests in the railroad property adjacent to the Tesla and Solyndra buildings. Her husband, Dick Blum, is a real estate developer. And I talked before about Dick Blum's involvement with people like John Barbagelata, George Moscone, Wilkes Bashford, Terrence Hallinan, Willie Brown, Herb Cain. These guys were scandalous in San Francisco. He's going to come up here pretty soon. The Feinstein family owned the construction company which Tesla and Solyndra used. They were given no bid contracts. How about that? Wow. Feinstein and her husband worked with White House staff under Rahm Emanuel and Silicon Valley campaign financier John Doerr and Associates, involved with Kleiner Perkins. That's one of the big hedge funds in Silicon Valley. Kleiner Perkins does investment, big time investment. They provide angel money to start businesses. Kleiner Perkins to conduit bribes and campaign financing as stock warrants and positions. Roger Boas is another guy. He was a car dealer in San Francisco. Again, part of that notorious gang that Dick Blum ran with in San Francisco. Feinstein associate Roger Boas was arrested for involvement, get this, in a child prostitution ring for political pedophiles and embezzling money for the Moscone Convention Center construction. So the Moscone Center is this big convention center named after George Moscone, obviously, in San Francisco. And Boas skimmed off of it. He skimmed off it because, you get all this money flowing in. Boy, counting sometimes is really difficult. And you could set up a little shell company or a little charter business or whatever, and you can get a bid on a contract for a project that may be non-existent. This is what the Clintons did all the time down with the Rose Law Firm in Arkansas. They would have these projects that were either in their own interests so that they could use that money for whatever it is that they were going to use it for. In one instance, the reconstruction, the reconfiguring of planes that would be able to take large amounts of weapons and bring large amounts of cocaine back into the United States. That was a project that was put together by the Clintons. I think Bill Clinton had passed this bill in Arkansas that allowed the state to invest in certain companies that had a vested interest with state business. So this thing got passed. And it was, again, anytime they pass a bill, the idea was, for public works. Like, let's say, for instance, Hope, Arkansas needed a new youth center. Okay. So the government of Arkansas that time could take money, they could take government money, and they could easily throw it at a private contractor or private institution in order to get a public work done. That was basically how it was set up. And of course, they set it up in a way that was not used in that fashion. So I'm getting off the Feinstein piece a little bit here, but I want to talk about this because what happened is that they were taking this money and they were processing the money and the loan applications through the Rose Law Firm. And one of the first projects they did was with Webb Hubbell's father. And Webb Hubbell is supposedly the father of Chelsea Clinton. Kind of looks like him a little bit. Doesn't really look like Bill. Anyway, and what they did is they took this money and they reconfigured planes so they could use the planes to fly guns in and fly guns out and cocaine in. This happens all the time. Okay, so it's embezzlement with government contracts. So, but this is interesting though, the pedophilia, the child prostitution ring. So I talked about this before and alluded to this on a previous show not long ago, where these guys would go to these houses of ill repute, where there were young women, young girls, who were being holed up, caged up, and were there and being used as child prostitutes. And Boaz was arrested on this. It's part of a huge ring. And again, you shall know them by the company they keep. And Boaz was one of Dick Blum's best buddies. Okay. The Feinstein family held war profiteering contracts in Afghanistan, Bolivia, and other regions, which held the exclusive mining contracts for Solyndra and Tesla chemicals. After Solyndra was raided by the FBI and went bankrupt, the FBI went in and took everything, costing taxpayers over $500 billion in losses. Think about that. $500 billion in basically a bogus company that was set up to fail and profiting Dianne Feinstein and her family every step of the way. Just think where that $500 billion could have gone to. After Solyndra was raided by the FBI, went bankrupt, costing taxpayers over $500 billion in losses, the Feinstein cartel used the tax write-off losses to make a profit via tax form manipulations on the tax write-off losses from the Solyndra crash. They were able to profit going both ways, coming and going. Feinstein and her staff sabotaged other applicants who were competing for the same funds as Tesla and Solyndra. So other gangs wanted the money. Even after Solyndra went bankrupt, the Feinstein family continued to profit off of the Solyndra scandal by releasing the buildings and collecting real estate profits. Feinstein family ran the property sales and leasing contracts for the Tesla and Solyndra buildings. Gary D. Conley, a Bay Area solar and hydrogen company CEO, whistleblew on the corruption at Tesla and Solyndra and was later found with a bullet in his head behind a Northern California Air Force base. His family and friends charged that his death was suspicious. You think? Feinstein's family and associates held stock in Tesla, Solyndra, and other clean tech. See, that was Obama's thing. Clean tech. We're going to get into clean tech. We're going to eliminate coal because guess what? There are a bunch of other people that we don't like that are profiting off of coal. So we're going to cut their profit base off. And when you cut their profit base off, what happens? You cut off their influence, their political influence, their political power. In the meantime, we're going to create a whole new sector called clean tech. And we're going to tax the shit out of people and get all this money for clean tech. And then we're going to redistribute the wealth. So that was Obama's plan, the redistribution of wealth into bogus companies and bogus paradigms around clean tech, and Solyndra being one of these companies. All right, I'll keep reading here. Let's see. Feinstein and her staff told Fremont, California. That's where, I'm sorry, I thought it was Hayward. It's Fremont. That's where the plant was. Fremont, California, city officers to not engage in discussion with competing applicants. So let's say, for instance, there are people that wanted to rent that place out because we know how successful that location has been. Feinstein and Blum and their associates are telling the city of Fremont, um, you know, don't do it. Don't talk to these people. It's like a shakedown. I can just see it, right? Coming into the offices. It's not. It's not Feinstein who goes there. It's some very ominous looking person who sits down with the city manager and gets very intense and says, "We'd like to just communicate to you that it's really in your best interest not to talk to other applicants." Capiche? Capiche? Oh yes, I understand. I understand clearly what you're trying to communicate with me. Although other competing applicants had been in written discussions and negotiations with senior executives at Toyota for the use of the NUMMI plant, Feinstein warned Toyota that only Tesla would be supported for the use of the plant. This was before anyone from Tesla had contacted anyone from Toyota, the owners of the plant, and after Elon Musk had been published in the press saying that Tesla could have no use for the building. It was like, Tesla, you're going to get the fuck in this building. This is where you're going to build your cars, and you're going to shut the fuck up about it. In conclusion, the facts, evidence, testimony, and surveillance clearly prove Dianne Feinstein used her public office to stage a corruption program to provide public cash and resources to herself and her family for covert profits at taxpayer expense. She used her office to assist in the attacks and sabotage of U.S. companies who were competing for the same funds that she was manipulating. So here's a compilation of evidence. Everything that I just put together in conjunction with those bullet points. It's all here. And I'm going to put it into the show page as a link. Okay. There's some great stuff here. Oh my God. Oh my God. Good memes. Good meme stuff. Let me get into the chat room here. What's going on? Let's see. Yeah, my cat's pretty cool. Jasper's the man. Sounds like a major breakdown in communication or false flag. Yeah, that's in reference to what happened with Syria. Pigeons coming home to roost. Just announced Dianne Feinstein, she's to support anarchy. Yeah, absolutely. Our government is the biggest mafia of all. Absolutely. That's why people get into government. It is the most clean and sure way to secure and accrue massive amounts of profit. Susan Rice left Washington with what was the figure? Was it $25 million? Let me get the figure. It's really significant. Okay. Look at this here. Let's see. It's funny. You do a search on stuff, and it's very hard to get something hardcore and biting through Google search. Let's do this again. The number is significant. So you can find it. She's got $14 million in assets. $14 million in assets. And a lot of that was made while she was working in the Obama administration in Washington, D.C. She's on the board of Netflix now. You see how this works? She was a senior fellow at Brookings. Her husband is Ian Cameron. He was a former executive producer for ABC News. Here we go. This is the figure I was trying to find here. Rice is placed on an annual salary of $172,000. As for her net worth, she has an eye-popping wealth valued at $50 million, which she supposedly amassed from her political career, assets she reportedly inherited from her parents, who were well-to-do. And these socialists do really well, don't they? They make a lot of money. So this is what I'm talking about. Even though she comes from a line of wealthy people, she made a lot of money in Washington, D.C. $172,000 becomes $50 million by the time she leaves. It's a pretty good magic trick, don't you think? Yeah, so this is what happens with people in government. There are some people who I do believe that it's their way to serve and be committed, but by and large, that mission gets corrupted somewhere along the way. Yeah, the government is a very significant crime syndicate. So the draining of the swamp would be quite good. And I think perhaps even the total collapse might be even better, because the roots run deep. And it's not just the corruption in our government. The corruption is global in scope. It is global. Wrap your head around that. It's not just in the United States. It is global. Anyway, that's what we're up against. Let me see if I can find something of interest and send you guys out on a positive note today. Because we've deconstructed a lot. And the reason I brought the Feinstein stuff up is because she's the point person who is doing her best to get Kavanaugh knocked off the perch and have one of their candidates as a Supreme Court justice put in. And she's bringing this Professor Blassie forward. And I think it's really just important to note at a very surface level. Those are surface kinds of pieces of corruption that you need to know about Feinstein. Period. End of story. Okay. Let's see. What else do we have? 25 people, by the way, have now lost their lives at Florence. Next phase of Florence disaster arrives. Catastrophic river floods, massive mudslides. Remember, we're going to see the emergence of a hero, and likely during this Florence event, and perhaps after the Florence event, the emergence of a hero. James O'Keefe has a new Project Veritas he's going to bust out. That'll be interesting. Let's see. What else do we have here? People are asking Putin to step down. Wow. That ain't going to happen. Not even close. I'm just trying to find something positive to send you guys off on. Quick scan. All right. I'm going to do double positive tomorrow. I promise. I'll do double positive tomorrow. So you get your double dose of positivity and tools to work with in your everyday life. Okay. All right. There's more stuff. I got to end the show. I got things I got to do. I could sit here for the next couple hours and just go down rabbit holes. we're not going to do that. All right. So you know the drill. Use your head to discern what's real, your heart to stay open to what's possible. And whatever's going on, just you got to use your sixth sense to understand what's happening. Just try to use very advanced filters at this point because false flags and psyops are going to be all over the place. And your emotional center is really valuable. Don't move your emotional center into the center of these events without really stepping back for a little bit and trying to understand and detangle them. Because this is how they get us. This is the jump. This is how the loosh is just pulled right out of us and extracted into this kind of biocircuitry, this biopsychic machine that manufactures these events so they can feed off of our negativity, fear, and hatred for one another. Anyway, it's a lot to think about. Just pump the brakes on it, look around, and try to see what's really happening. It takes time. It takes time, which is kind of a luxury in a 24-hour news cycle. All right, I'll be back tomorrow here at 9 a.m. I promise I won't have a client in China that I'm working with, but I'll be back here tomorrow at 9 a.m. Central Standard Time to give you 15 minutes of flame. Have a wonderful day. I'm Robert Phoenix signing off.